Recently we did a video ranking every hypercoaster I have ever ridden. A hypercoaster is a classification of roller coasters standing 200 to 299 feet tall. There's also the Gigacoaster, which exceeds 300 feet tall, and the Stratocoaster that reaches 400 feet tall. But one that I've never been able to understand properly is the Megacoaster. Most coaster enthusiasts seem to refrain from using the term Megacoaster, probably because we can't quite figure out what it means. I've heard many different things from different people, with some saying it's just another way of saying hypercoaster. Others claim a Megacoaster is a roller coaster with a height in between 100 and 199 feet, which certainly makes the most sense. It's just tricky when you have companies like Intamin call Expedition GeForce and Hyperion Megacoasters, even though one's 173 feet tall and the other is 252 feet tall. With that in mind, I understand that a Megacoaster can maybe also be considered a hypercoaster, but a hypercoaster can't be considered a Megacoaster? To be honest, I can't quite figure it out, but for this list, I want to stay true to what I believe a traditional Megacoaster looks like. I'll be sticking with the 100 to 199 foot height range, and will consider a ride a Megacoaster if it meets the same criteria with the layout that I discussed in the hypercoaster video. Under most circumstances, 100 to 199 foot tall coasters with a launch cannot be considered a Megacoaster. To me, it must have a lift hill. Neither can a ride with an incomplete circuit like a shuttle coaster. It must not have a gimmick like a dive coaster, for example, which hangs you over the drop and has massive inversions. For that matter, any coaster with a focus on inversions will be exempt from this list. And lastly, it must be built from steel. I think that had to be pretty obvious. You'll notice that most of these rides have similar layouts to that of a hypercoaster, focusing on airtime that just aren't quite 200 feet tall. So now that we've established what a Megacoaster is, let's dive into the list. Number 11, Incredicoaster at Disney's California Adventure. I know what you're thinking, how the heck is Incredicoaster a Megacoaster? Well, earlier I said that there can't be a Megacoaster with a launch under most circumstances, but the only way I decided to give an exemption is if it's also got a lift hill with a drop spanning 100 to 199 feet. Incredicoaster was just barely able to qualify because it has a 108 foot tall drop. This is a really fun ride with a super long layout and tons of different elements. We mentioned that LAM launch, but it's a great time accelerating to 55 miles per hour. It's also got one inversion, a vertical loop, but I think it's clear that inversions aren't the highlight of this ride. To be honest, I'm not sure if there is a highlight to this ride. Incredicoaster doesn't exactly do a whole lot, but it's still fun gliding around the park and it has quite a bit of theming as well. Number 10, Powder Keg at Silver Dollar City. Once again, we have a rare example of a coaster that has a launch and a lift hill. Powder Keg is really pushing it here because its max height is just 98 feet tall, which doesn't even meet the threshold I'm looking for. However, it does have a 110 foot drop due to the terrain, which does it for me. Now, the fact that Powder Keg ranks at 10 says a thing or two about the quality of the rides on this list. I absolutely love this coaster, even though I've only gotten one ride on it. The compressed air launch at the start is super intense, the camelbacks give great airtime, and the second half, while weak on its own, does extend the ride time, making this a pretty complete experience. Number 9, Steel Eel at SeaWorld San Antonio. At last, our first traditional Megacoaster makes the cut. I went back and forth so many times on whether I prefer Powder Keg or Steel Eel, and to be honest, I still can't quite decide. I think some days I might lean one way and other days I'll lean the other. Focusing on what this ride does do well, it's got so many airtime hills producing shocking flagector airtime. I'm not talking flagector as in the strength of the airtime is somewhere in between floater and ejector. I'm talking floater as you're cresting over the hill with an ejector slam as you exit the hill. This happens over and over again in the first half, with more standard sustained floater airtime in the second half. Altogether, while it may only be 150 feet tall, Steel Eel is better than lots of Morgan hypercoasters above 200 feet. Number 8, Goliath at Wallaby Holland. This is the quintessential example of a Megacoaster in my opinion. It stands 153 feet tall with a focus on large airtime hills in the first half, helixes in the middle, and smaller hills in the end. Now, I think they nailed the airtime in the beginning and end sections, but I'm not much of a fan of the helixes in the middle and the twisted hills that separate them. Since I prefer a more consistent ride and this takes up a good chunk of the layout, Goliath couldn't rank any higher for me, but it's still a ride I'll always look forward to experiencing. Number 7, Phoenix at Fair Up Summerland. Here's one I was really on the fence with. Phoenix has the height I'm looking for, standing 131 feet tall, and it's got lots of airtime. Frankly, it's not much different from the Megalite coasters I featured later on in the list. The only difference is it's got inversions, which I did say before, coasters with a focus on inversions would not qualify to make this list. The thing is, having ridden Phoenix, I don't think the inversions were really the focus of the ride. It's a key component of the layout, but not the focus. What makes Phoenix so good is it's got a great balance of airtime hills and inversions. Overall, a great coaster that I could lap all day long. Number 6, Lightning Run at Kentucky Kingdom. This is the first of 2 Megalite style coasters on this list, and I'll explain what that means a bit later. Lightning Run's max drop is literally 100 feet on the dot, meaning it barely met the qualifications I was looking for. But I'll tell you what, this ride is a powerhouse for being so dang small. It's got tons of airtime, tons of quick transitions, and it's colossally smooth. Frankly, I don't really have any complaints for this ride, it just so happens that others rank higher. Number 5, Puratan at Jura Summerland. This is the other Megalite coaster to make my list. Puratan is literally part of what Intamin calls their Megalite model. Now, I mentioned earlier that this manufacturer, along with several others, consider the Megacoaster and Hypercoaster to be basically the same thing. When they say mega light, they're talking about a ride under 200 feet that can replicate the airtime experienced on a true hypercoaster. That, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what I'm looking for in this video. Now, Puratan and Lightning Run are two rides I closely compare because they each stand like a foot or two above 100 feet and have a focus on whippy airtime hills and turns. They're so much similar than I ever realized before making this video, and I really just put this one higher because it's got a little bit more airtime. Number 4, Let Coaster at Legendia. Everything I said about Phoenix applies to this ride, except it's much more intense. It too has 3 inversions, but they aren't really the focus of the ride. It's definitely part of what makes the layout so good, but it's not everything. I'd say the airtime is more of a highlight on Let Coaster, and I could argue the same for Phoenix as well. Let Coaster's largest drop is 131 feet, and it is a crazy beyond vertical twisting descent. An absolutely awesome way to kick off the ride, and it just works so well with all the other crazy elements you experience on this Vekoma coaster. Number 3, Expedition GeForce at Holiday Park. A lot of coaster enthusiasts think Expedition GeForce is a hypercoaster, but it actually only stands 174 feet tall. That said, it kills just about any actual hypercoaster you can think of. This ride is one of the greatest layouts in the world with a focus on sustained ejector airtime the whole way through. All of its elements are built within a wooded setting where you don't really know what's coming next unless you've memorized the layout. If there is a downside, I think the middle section with the turns does let its foot off the gas a little, but everything else is a 10 out of 10 in my book. Number 2, Maverick at Cedar Point. Yes, this is a multi-launch blitz coaster, but it just so happens that one of those launches act as a quick lift hill before a 100-foot beyond vertical drop. If you showed me a picture of just that first drop and nothing else, I'd say that looks like a mega coaster. Now, Maverick obviously has its second launch too, and that is absolutely insane. There is no dull moment on this ride, and if you've seen some of my other lists, you probably already know that I absolutely love this coaster. I will admit, you won't see me calling this thing a mega coaster in any other video, it's just that when we get technical, it did barely qualify to make it. But anyways, as amazing as Maverick is, there is one other coaster that reigns supreme, and I was more inclined to put this at number 1 because it is by definition a true mega coaster. Number 1 is Conda at Walibi, Belgium. This ride takes everything you love about Expedition GeForce and makes it better. There is no longer any lull in the middle of the ride, and the layout as a whole is more varied. It basically just feels modernized with how all the different elements are banked. Sure, you've got a lot of those large and small airtime hills that you've come to love from this model, but there's also outward banked hills, twisted double downs, and all sorts of cool stuff. Overall, Conda is an absolutely perfect coaster in my opinion, and it makes a lot of sense that it took the top spot on this list. I hope you all enjoyed this video, again, even if the definition of a mega coaster was a bit weird. I thought it would be fun to crack down on what the term really means and then make a list off of that. Let me know in the comments how you define a mega coaster and what your favorites are. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to Coaster Dash for more content in the future, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys.